Imagine discovering that your wife and best friend were living a secret life behind your back. This is how I uncovered their betrayal, and the unforgettable journey that followed. My wife, Jessica, and I had been together for 8 years. We were the kind of couple our friends envied. We had the laughs, the love, the deep conversations, at least, I thought we did. But lately, something had shifted, and while it was subtle, it was enough to plant a nagging doubt in my mind. It started with small things. Jessica's phone was always within her reach now, even during dinner. She'd angle it away, quickly dismiss notifications, and if I asked her about it, she'd shrug it off with a smile, saying it was just work or her family. But it was more than that, she seemed distant. Even when she was physically present, it felt like she was 1,000 miles away. She was the kind of person who could tell a lie like it was the truth, and it made me question whether I was just being paranoid or if there was something more. Then there was my friend, Ryan. We'd been close for years, since college, in fact. He was one of those friends you could count on for anything. I'd known him for so long that I trusted him almost as much as I trusted Jessica. He'd been around us often, so seeing him with Jessica was nothing new, yet recently, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but their interaction seemed too comfortable. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking, that they were just friendly because they knew each other well. But as days passed, the feeling only grew stronger, and I began noticing even more subtle changes in Jessica's behavior. She'd suddenly developed an interest in going out, with friends, on nights she'd usually spend at home. When I'd offer to come along, she'd insist it was just a girls' night. For the first time in years, I found myself wondering if I was being played. Over the next few weeks, things only got stranger. Jessica was always busy, claiming work deadlines or last-minute plans with friends. I'd always known her to be organized, someone who planned things days in advance, so the sudden spontaneity felt off. Then, one night, she came home late. She'd mentioned a dinner with her friend Emma, but when she walked in, her makeup was slightly smudged, her hair a little messy. She didn't look like she'd just come from a casual dinner. I asked her how the night went, trying to sound casual, and she answered a little too quickly. "Oh, it was fine. You know, just girl talk and all that." She flashed a quick smile and disappeared into the bathroom before I could ask more. Something in her tone felt rehearsed, like she'd anticipated my question and prepared an answer. It gnawed at me. Jessica was good with words, she could talk her way through anything, but there was an edge in her responses now, something forced. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Ryan, on the other hand, had also been acting differently. He was usually the first to text me about weekend plans, but lately, he'd gone quiet. When we did meet up, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly, like he was waiting for a message he didn't want me to see. One night, while we were grabbing a beer, I decided to bring up Jessica, hoping for some reassurance. I casually mentioned that she'd been busy with girls' nights and work functions, expecting him to make some joke or reassure me. Instead, Ryan's face tightened, just for a second, before he quickly covered it up. "Oh, yeah, everyone's busy these days," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. I laughed it off, but inside, a chill went down my spine. There was something he wasn't saying, something he didn't want me to know. After that night with Ryan, my mind went into overdrive. I found myself analyzing every detail, every excuse, every change in Jessica's behavior. Maybe I was being paranoid, or maybe I was finally starting to see the truth. The uncertainty was eating me alive. One Friday evening, Jessica told me she'd be going out with Emma again. "Just dinner, nothing crazy," she said with a laugh that felt too cheerful, too forced. She leaned in to kiss me goodbye, but I noticed a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of guilt. Or maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. After she left, I tried to brush it off, but something snapped inside me. I grabbed my keys and decided to go for a drive, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. I didn't have a plan, just a feeling that I needed to do something other than sit at home and wait. About 20 minutes into the drive, I found myself near the restaurant where Jessica had mentioned she'd be with Emma. I told myself I wasn't checking up on her, just passing by, but as I neared the restaurant, I spotted Jessica's car parked nearby. I felt a wave of relief, it was exactly where she said she'd be. But as I drove past, I didn't see her inside with Emma. I parked down the block, heart pounding, and walked toward the restaurant. Just as I was about to go in, a flash of movement caught my eye through the window. There she was, Jessica, sitting at a table, laughing, leaning in close to someone. But it wasn't Emma sitting across from her. It was Ryan. They were deep in conversation, their heads close, their expressions warm in a way that was anything but friendly. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Jessica and Ryan hadn't seen me, so I stepped back, keeping out of sight, watching them as a flood of emotions washed over me. I didn't confront them then, didn't even go inside. Instead, I walked back to my car, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. This was no ordinary dinner, and the trust I'd held onto was crumbling before my eyes. After seeing Jessica and Ryan laughing together at that restaurant, I felt a surge of anger so strong it pushed me past the point of holding back. Before I knew it, I was walking through the entrance, my heart pounding, but my mind was strangely calm. I was done waiting for an explanation. It was time for answers. I walked straight over to their table, and as I approached, Jessica's laughter froze, her face going pale. Ryan's expression shifted from surprise to a kind of dread, but neither of them said a word. I pulled out a chair and sat down next to them, forcing a smile that probably didn't reach my eyes. "So," I said, looking from Jessica to Ryan, "how are we doing tonight? Everything good here? Or am I interrupting something?" My voice was calm, but there was an edge of anger I couldn't quite keep out. Jessica stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, Matt. I thought you were at home." I raised an eyebrow. "You thought I was at home? Funny, because I thought you were out with Emma tonight." I glanced at Ryan, who was looking down, avoiding my gaze. "And you," I continued, "you don't text or call for weeks, but here you are, out with my wife. Nice to catch up, buddy." They both sat in stunned silence, Jessica looking as if she wanted the ground to swallow her up, while Ryan looked like he couldn't decide whether to defend himself or keep his mouth shut. Finally, Jessica managed to say, "Matt, it's not what it looks like." I let out a small laugh, leaning back in my chair. "Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like my wife and my so-called friend having a nice, cozy dinner together behind my back." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat, but I held up my hand. "Save it. I'm not here for excuses. I just wanted to see if my instincts were right." I stood up, giving them one last look, my heart pounding but my face calm. "Enjoy your evening," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "And don't worry, we'll talk later." After leaving them at the restaurant, I drove home in silence, my mind racing. The look on their faces when I sat down next to them, the awkward tension, they'd been completely blindsided, caught in a web of their own deceit. But as satisfying as it was to see them squirm, I knew this was only the beginning. Jessica didn't come home that night. I didn't know whether she'd stayed with Ryan or found some other excuse to be away, but the silence of the house was almost too much. Part of me felt relieved, angry as I was, I still wasn't ready to hear her excuses. I needed time to think, to figure out what I was going to do. The next day, she finally returned. She walked through the door, looking worn out, her face tense as if she'd been rehearsing what to say. She barely looked at me as she took off her coat, and I could feel the weight of the confrontation we both knew was coming. "Matt," she started, her voice soft, hesitant. "I'm sorry about last night. I should have told you. Ryan and I were just catching up." I looked at her, keeping my voice steady. "Catching up?" "Jessica, Friends don't have to hide from their spouse to catch up. And they definitely don't lie about who they're with. She opened her mouth, but I could see she didn't have a real explanation, only the same tired excuses I'd heard before. I never meant for things to look this way, she whispered, as if that made any difference. I took a deep breath. Jessica, I think it's time we're honest, really honest. I need you to tell me the truth about what's going on between you and Ryan. She paused, looking down, and for the first time, I saw her walls begin to crack. But instead of confessing, she took a step back, her face hardening. We're just friends, Matt. You're reading too much into this, she said, her voice defiant. I shook my head, disappointed but not surprised. Fine, I replied, my voice calm. If that's how you want to play it. But know this, I'm not going to stop until I find out the truth. And when I do, there'll be no going back. I left her standing there, the silence stretching between us. After that conversation, it was clear Jessica wasn't going to give me the truth willingly. She was too deep into her lies, too skilled at twisting reality to suit her narrative. But I knew what I'd seen, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. If she wouldn't come clean, I'd find the truth on my own. The next few days, I started paying close attention to her routines, looking for any clue that might reveal the reality she was so desperately trying to hide. I'd notice her leaving the house with vague excuses, phone in hand, her eyes darting nervously as if she sensed I was watching. She'd leave for yoga class and return looking refreshed, yet distant, like her mind was somewhere else. One evening, I decided to dig a little deeper and went through our phone records. I'd never been one to check her calls or texts, but at this point, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I wasn't surprised to see Ryan's number popping up frequently, hidden among the usual calls. Late-night calls, long conversations that didn't match up with her story of a casual friendship. It was all there, a breadcrumb trail leading straight to the truth. I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak with each piece of evidence. There it was, the confirmation I'd needed but hadn't wanted. But I still wanted to catch them directly, to end this charade once and for all. The next day, Jessica told me she'd be out for a few hours to run errands. Something in her tone felt different, almost excited, and I knew this was it. I waited until she left, giving her enough time to reach her destination before I followed. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find something that would change everything. And when I finally reached the hotel where I'd seen her with Ryan before, there they were, together once again. They were seated in the hotel's lobby, leaning in close, speaking in hushed tones that felt too intimate for any errand. This time, I wasn't just a silent observer. I took out my phone, snapped a photo of them together, and walked away, my heart pounding as I realized the final piece of the truth was now in my hands. With the photo in my hand, I finally had undeniable proof of Jessica and Ryan's betrayal. I'd caught them, plain and simple. As I drove home, the shock settled into a cold, steady resolve. This was no longer about doubt or suspicion. It was about facing the truth head-on, for both of us. That night, I waited for Jessica to come home. She walked through the door, casual and unbothered, clearly expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But I was done pretending. I took a deep breath, holding up my phone with the photo displayed on the screen. I didn't say a word, just watched as her expression shifted from confusion to horror. She froze, her face turning pale. "Matt, what is that?" she stammered, though we both knew exactly what it was. I leaned back, keeping my tone even. "Why don't you tell me, Jessica?" "Because to me, it looks a lot like my wife spending errand time with my best friend." "Care to explain what exactly you two were catching up on?" Jessica's composure crumbled. She opened her mouth, struggling for words, but nothing came out. Her face flushed with shame, but there was still a hint of defiance in her eyes, as if she could somehow salvage this. "Matt, it's not what it looks like," she finally whispered, but her voice was trembling. Not what it looks like. I echoed, feeling a bitter laugh escape. Then tell me, Jessica, what is it? Because I've seen you two together enough times to know this isn't just friendship. She dropped her gaze, and for a moment, I thought she'd finally confess. But instead, she tried a different tactic. We've just been talking. Things have been rough between us, and I needed someone to talk to. It wasn't supposed to be anything more. I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of disappointment layered over the anger. So, this is how you handle a rough patch. By sneaking around with my best friend, lying to my face, night after night. Jessica finally broke, her shoulders sagging as the truth she tried so hard to hide began to unravel. I'm sorry, Matt. I know I've hurt you, but it just happened. I didn't plan for this, and I didn't want you to find out this way. You didn't plan for this? I repeated, the bitterness in my voice clear. You didn't plan to betray me with the one person I trusted most? Because from where I'm standing, this looks a lot like a carefully hidden betrayal. She looked down, tears beginning to fall, but I was beyond feeling sympathy. I'd been patient, I'd waited, and now, I had everything I needed. I stood up, each step feeling like I was finally walking away from the lies and into the truth. This is over, Jessica, I said quietly. I deserve more than this. And you both deserve each other. Jessica didn't try to follow me as I left the room. She just stood there, silent, with that same look of shock on her face. I think she finally realized just how much she'd shattered with her lies. But I was beyond caring about her feelings at that moment. I was focused on taking back control of my life. The next day, I called Ryan. I wanted to hear it from him. Maybe it was closure, or maybe just an old instinct of loyalty trying to understand why he had betrayed me so completely. When he picked up, his voice was casual, as if nothing had happened. But I cut right to the chase. Ryan, I said, keeping my voice steady. I know everything. I know about you and Jessica. There was a pause, and I could practically feel him scrambling for words on the other end. Matt, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Ryan, I interrupted, my tone hard. I have a photo of you two together. And I know about all the nights you spent with her, hiding behind my back. You were my best friend. I trusted you, and you decided to throw that away. Silence. Finally, he let out a shaky sigh, his voice low and defeated. Matt, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It got out of hand. Out of hand. I repeated bitterly. That's all you have to say. You destroyed our friendship, my marriage, and my trust, and all you can say is that it got out of hand. I know it sounds terrible, he said, his voice pleading. But please, just, give me a chance to explain. There's nothing left to explain, Ryan, I replied, my tone icy. I don't need excuses or apologies. You made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. I hope she was worth it. Without waiting for a response, I ended the call, feeling a strange sense of finality. It was like a door had closed, one I'd never reopen. Ryan had been part of my life for years, but I felt nothing but relief knowing that I'd never have to deal with him again. Later that evening, Jessica made one last attempt to patch things up. She approached me, eyes red, voice shaky. Matt, please, let's talk about this. I know I hurt you, but I'm willing to work through this. Can't we try to fix it? I looked at her, feeling almost numb. Jessica, you didn't just hurt me. You betrayed everything we built together. You lied, again and again, thinking I'd never find out. And even now, you want to fix this? How am I supposed to believe anything you say? She reached out, her hand trembling. I'll do anything, Matt. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Please don't throw us away. I shook my head, finally feeling the weight lift. You already threw us away, Jessica. You made that choice the moment you decided to lie to me and sleep with Ryan. I turned, leaving her standing there, knowing that there was no going back. For the first time, I felt free from the web of lies and betrayal. And as painful as it was, I knew I'd made the right choice. I was ready to move forward, without her. Walking away from Jessica and Ryan had given me some peace, but it wasn't enough. After everything they'd put me through, I wanted them to feel the weight of their choices, to understand just how deeply they'd shattered my trust. And so, I started putting together a plan, something that would show them both exactly what betrayal felt like. First, I dug deeper into Ryan's life. I knew where he worked, the people he connected with, and the kind of reputation he prided himself on. As a business professional in a tight-knit community, Ryan relied heavily on his image. And Jessica, she thrived on the social circle we'd built together, the friendships and connections she had made through me. I was going to dismantle all of that. The first part of my plan was simple. I made sure our closest friends knew the truth. No dramatic announcements, just a quiet conversation with a few well-placed friends. Over coffee or a drink, I'd mention how I'd discovered Jessica's affair with Ryan, casually revealing what they'd done, with just enough details to leave an impact. Word spread quickly, as I knew it would. Friends who had once admired Jessica and Ryan began to keep their distance, their trust and respect for them quietly dissolving. Our friend group started to unravel, and Ryan's social standing began to slip. He'd been well regarded among our circle, but now people were looking at him with suspicion, whispers following him at every gathering. Jessica felt it too. She would find herself alone at events or overhear friends exchanging uncomfortable glances, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her from all sides. Then came the next piece, Ryan's job. His company had strict policies about workplace conduct and professionalism. While his affair with Jessica hadn't directly violated those policies, I knew his colleagues and supervisors would take a dim view of his personal choices affecting his reputation. I contacted his boss anonymously, simply mentioning that Ryan's recent behavior might be worth looking into, suggesting that there were issues he was dealing with that were impacting his focus at work. I didn't have to say much more, office rumors do the work themselves. Within days, word spread through his office, and I heard he was called in for a discussion with his supervisor. Ryan was under scrutiny now, the stability he'd always taken for granted beginning to shake. Jessica, on the other hand, relied heavily on her social circle, her status, and her reputation for security and stability. So, I took that away, too. I reached out to her friends, some of whom were mutual friends from my side, and let them know what had happened, sparing no details. I shared how she'd lied to me repeatedly, how she'd hidden an affair right under my nose. It wasn't long before her closest friends began pulling away, and invitations that once filled her weekends started drying up. For Jessica, the social isolation was brutal. She depended on those connections for validation, for her sense of worth. And now, all she had left was Ryan, the man who'd been willing to betray his best friend but whose life was crumbling just as fast. Finally, I took the one photo I'd taken of them together at the hotel, the moment I'd first seen them up close, together. I didn't plaster it online, didn't post it publicly, but I made sure it reached them. I sent the photo to both Jessica and Ryan with a single message: actions have consequences. I hope you both enjoy yours. It was the final nail, a reminder that I knew everything, and that they'd never be able to undo what they'd done. After sending that message, I felt lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted from my shoulders. I knew I couldn't undo the past, but I'd shown them both that betrayal came with a cost. And with that, I was ready to move forward, leaving them to face the fallout of their choices. For the first time, I felt genuinely free, no longer bound by the pain they'd caused. My focus shifted to rebuilding, creating a life I could be proud of, a life where trust, loyalty, and respect weren't just words, but values I'd carry forward, no matter how dark the past had been. With my plan complete and the truth out, I started to feel a deep sense of closure. Ryan's carefully built reputation had begun to crumble, and Jessica's social circle, the life she had so carefully crafted, was slipping away from her. I'd left them to deal with the pieces of their lives, each one shattered by their own actions. But for me, this was the end of that chapter. I was ready to start fresh. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself. I reconnected with old friends, those who'd supported me even when I didn't know the truth. They were the ones who reminded me of who I was before all of this, someone with passions, goals, and dreams. I started spending more time at the gym, throwing myself into hobbies I'd neglected, and finding new things to look forward to. Eventually, I decided it was time to move out of the home I'd shared with Jessica. The memories there, both good and bad, felt heavy, and I knew I couldn't fully move on while staying in a place filled with her shadows. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a space that was completely mine. Moving day felt like a cleanse, each box packed and unpacked a step toward letting go of the past. One weekend, while grabbing a coffee in a cafe near my new apartment, I ran into someone unexpected, Lily, a mutual friend I hadn't seen in years. We had drifted apart over time, but seeing her again felt like running into an old friend who truly understood me. She'd heard bits and pieces of what had happened and offered a sympathetic ear, one that felt genuine and sincere. We started meeting up occasionally, for coffee or walks in the park, each conversation deeper than the last. Lily had been through her own fair share of struggles, and in a way, we both understood the importance of moving forward, of healing from hurt that ran deep. Slowly, I felt myself opening up, finding comfort in her presence. With time, those casual meetups turned into something more. Lily reminded me that trust and happiness were possible, even after the darkest betrayals. She didn't just understand my story, she listened to it without judgment, and being with her felt like finding solid ground again. As months passed, life took on a new, fulfilling rhythm. Jessica and Ryan were no longer in the picture, just memories fading into the background, lessons learned but not dwelled upon. My focus had shifted fully to building something meaningful and real, both for myself and with Lily. Reflecting on everything, I realized that Jessica and Ryan's betrayal hadn't defined me. It had been painful, yes, but it also opened my eyes to what truly mattered: honesty, resilience, and people who genuinely cared. I was stronger, clearer, and far more grateful for the small joys of each day than I'd ever been before. And as I sat there one evening, watching the sunset from my new apartment, I knew that my life was finally my own again, a life where trust was earned, respect was mutual, and happiness was found in the quiet, honest moments. When the day of the divorce arrived, I walked into the courtroom feeling a strange mix of relief and finality. After everything that had happened, the lies, betrayal, and carefully crafted revenge, this felt like the final step in letting go. I was ready to cut the last tie connecting me to Jessica. Jessica arrived, looking tense and somewhat defeated, a shadow of the confident person she once was. She barely looked at me, her eyes cast downward as if avoiding the reality she'd created. Her lawyer, looking equally uneasy, went through the formalities, trying to secure whatever she could get from the settlement. But I'd come prepared, with evidence of the affair, financial details, and every documented piece of her deception. My lawyer presented everything methodically, laying out the case piece by piece. The judge listened intently, nodding as each piece of evidence painted a clear picture of the betrayal. With proof of her infidelity, Jessica's chances of claiming any significant assets dwindled quickly. The house, savings, and any financial support she hoped for were all off the table. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, realizing how limited her options were. Her once confident demeanor faltered under the weight of the reality she now had to face. She looked over at me, as if hoping for some sign of leniency, but I met her gaze with quiet resolve. I was done giving her any part of my life. The judge finalized the divorce, ruling that I would keep the house and the majority of our shared assets. Jessica walked away with only her personal belongings, a stark reminder of everything she'd lost. There was no more hiding behind lies or relying on others to fund her lifestyle. The life she'd sacrificed everything for had crumbled, leaving her with nothing. Leaving the courtroom, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. It was over, the deceit, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. Everything had been resolved, and I was finally free to move on. Jessica, on the other hand, was left with the consequences of her own choices, her once carefully built life now a shell of what it had been. As I walked out of that courthouse, the sun shining down felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. I was ready to rebuild my life on my terms, free from the shadows of the past. For the first time, I felt truly free. About a month after the divorce was finalized, just as life was beginning to feel normal again, I got a call from a mutual friend who hesitated before delivering the news: Jessica was pregnant. My heart sank. I'd thought I was beyond the reach of her choices, but this news hit like a wave, bringing with it emotions I wasn't ready for. But there was more. Apparently, Ryan, the friend who'd betrayed me, the man she'd chosen over our marriage, had left her. Even after hearing she was expecting his child, he hadn't returned. He'd cut off contact completely, leaving Jessica alone to face the consequences of her choices. The whole thing felt surreal, like a final twist I hadn't seen coming. Jessica was carrying the child of a man who'd promised her the world only to abandon her as soon as things got real. And now, she was left to handle the aftermath of their affair alone. Strangely, I didn't feel satisfaction or anger. Instead, I felt a kind of sad, distant pity. Jessica had thrown everything away, our marriage, her stability, her friendships, for someone who clearly didn't value her enough to stand by her. And now, she was left with nothing but an uncertain future and a child she'd have to raise alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd traded a steady, committed relationship for fleeting thrills and promises that evaporated the moment she needed them most. And Ryan? He'd exposed his true character by disappearing the instant responsibility knocked on his door. The two of them had made their choices, and now those choices were coming back to haunt them. That night, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized I felt no bitterness. Jessica and Ryan had both dug their own graves, so to speak, and the outcomes they were facing were entirely of their own making. For me, it was the final step in letting go of the pain they'd caused. I thought of the fresh life I was building and the support I'd found in Lily. She had become a steady presence in my life, showing me that trust and kindness still existed. With her, I'd found a new sense of purpose and a calm I hadn't known in years. In the end, Jessica and Ryan's betrayal had given me one unexpected gift: clarity. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that everything I'd been through had led me to a place of true peace. I was finally free. A few weeks after hearing the news of Jessica's pregnancy, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that she'd had an abortion. The news stopped me in my tracks, not just because of what she'd done, but because of what it revealed about her. Jessica's choices had shown time and again that she acted impulsively, but this? It confirmed what I'd started to realize after the affair: she lived her life without regard for the consequences or the impact of her actions. In a way, the abortion felt like a reflection of her entire approach to life. She'd entered our marriage, then betrayed it, thrown away our life together for the excitement of a fling, and when that fell apart, she turned her back on the life she was responsible for creating. Every decision, every step she'd taken had been about her, about getting what she wanted in the moment, without any thought to what came next. Learning this didn't bring anger, it brought a kind of sad acceptance. Jessica had proven, once and for all, that she was unwilling or unable to take responsibility for her actions. There was no empathy, no commitment to anything but her own desires, even at the cost of something as serious as a life. It was as though she'd been searching for happiness without understanding that it came from the choices we make and the people we value. Thinking back, I realized that I'd spent years trying to be the partner she'd needed, trying to be supportive, to build a life with her. And now, standing on the other side of it all, I saw just how one-sided it had been. She hadn't truly valued what we'd had, and in the end, she didn't truly value what she tried to replace it with, either. The news brought a final, resolute sense of closure. I'd moved forward in many ways, rebuilding my life, reconnecting with myself, and finding new meaning in the people around me. But this revelation about Jessica felt like the last piece of the puzzle. It freed me from any lingering what-ifs, and for the first time, I felt as though I understood her completely. I was finally ready to leave it all in the past, grateful for the clarity and peace that had come from such a painful experience. Whatever lay ahead, I knew I'd live it with intention, responsibility, and an appreciation for the kind of life I wanted, a life that Jessica, in all her choices, had shown me she could never be part of. With each passing day, the weight of the past grew lighter. Learning about Jessica's final decision had given me a sense of closure I hadn't expected, but needed. I no longer held on to anger or regret. I understood, fully and finally, that the person I'd once loved simply wasn't capable of the commitment or honesty needed for a real partnership. She'd made choices that had led her down a lonely path, and I was ready to leave her there, moving forward on my own. One evening, I found myself standing by the window in my new place, watching the sun set over the city. It felt like a metaphor for everything I'd been through, letting the light of the past dip below the horizon so that something new could rise in its place. My thoughts drifted to the person I was becoming, shaped by the lessons I'd learned from Jessica and Ryan's betrayal but no longer defined by them. As the months passed, I felt myself growing into this new life. I continued spending time with friends who'd been by my side through everything, and I invested in relationships that felt genuine. Lily and I grew closer, too, our bond deepening as we both shared a desire for a life built on trust, honesty, and understanding. One day, as we were walking through the park, Lily looked at me, a smile touching her lips. "You seem different, lighter somehow," she said. And she was right. I felt like a new person, like I'd shed the remnants of that old life and stepped into a future that was entirely mine to shape. Looking back, I realized Jessica and Ryan's betrayal had, in a way, given me a gift I hadn't expected. I'd learned the importance of valuing the people in my life, of choosing relationships based on integrity, and of setting boundaries to protect myself. Their choices had led me through pain, but that pain had forced me to grow in ways I never would have otherwise. As I watched the sun sink below the horizon that evening, I felt a profound peace. The storm had passed, and in its place was a quiet clarity, a certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. For the first time, I felt like I was truly home.